Is Final Fantasy 16 really worth all the hype that's behind it? Short answer, yes.
Nice.
But maybe not for the reasons that you would think. I've played Final Fantasy 14, the MMORPG, for the greater half of this year. And in that time, I decided that I would give another Final Fantasy game a try. I would try out something other than just an MMO. And let me just say, I have been thoroughly impressed by everything that this game brings to the table. And here are my first impressions. Final Fantasy games kind of have a knack for being not only a mix of really good storytelling, but really fast-paced and kind of flashy combat, almost anime-style combat, but they bring along iconic characters, memorable characters, as well as setting the stage and building the world which this story is told. And it's all put together usually in a very delicate manner, and I think that's why the Final Fantasy games garner a lot of attention and, well, we'll say a passion from their community. And not to mention some of those iconic characters that they have, they are carried over from game to game to game. So you don't necessarily need to play all 15 Final Fantasies before 16 to understand what's going on in 16. They all are, in a sense, their own standalone game. Now, I won't sit here and say that I've put thousands of hours into every Final Fantasy game to have that total empirical experience. This is coming from basically someone who has very limited experience in the Final Fantasy's story. And my experience has been a really good one jumping into 16. I mean, I've kept my eye on this game for quite a while. Since they did the crossover event in Final Fantasy 14, I got to try it out and I was like, that's going to be good. And then when I found out that it was coming to the PC market, I knew I was going to have to probably play it. Let's be serious. And yeah, I had to be very, very patient when Final Fantasy 16 was coming to the PC because I really didn't want to buy a PlayStation. I'll be honest. What's it? A PS5 Pro is now like $1,000. What are we doing, Sony? What really stood out to me as a we'll say Final Fantasy like pro, like I've only had the Final Fantasy 14 experience. I don't know how all these universes are built and the carryover from game to game to game. What really stood out to me was the cinematic clashes, the like fast-paced, almost kind of like aggressive combat. And the storytelling really just does a great job of capitalizing everything else that's around us, leading us from one point to the next in a seamless way. But is that really enough for it to be a good game? So one of the biggest problems that I have heard of, and even to some degree my own experience with fantasy games, Final Fantasy games, is that typically the story takes a while to build up. It's not necessarily that the story is bad, it is more so that for us to get from point A to point B where the good elements come in, it usually takes a while. And I mean, if you think about this in any sense of a good story being told, you need to build up the world around you so that everything that happens makes sense, so that there's that larger payoff down the road. And I feel like Final Fantasy 16 does kind of start out pretty slow. I mean, I think even when I played the demo, there was about 25 minutes worth of cinematics that I watched that I really didn't even get to play. I should have made a bag of popcorn. Now, of course, that's a gross overestimation, and that's more so me being satirical. However, it is true. Typically, one of the biggest complaints that I have from people who are coming in, trying Final Fantasy as a we'll say, like this is their first title that they've played, has been that it's a slower paced and, you know, it doesn't fire up that ADHD brain where I need to do combat and action right there. It does pay off later. You do get a lot more combat a lot more frequently as the game progresses. So there is that payoff. And that's kind of what I'm starting to see as I've played more and more different Final Fantasies, is that it does take time for these things to build up. There has also been some negative talk about how the combat can just feel repetitive. And I can understand that, and I actually kind of do agree with it within the first couple of hours of the game. Yes, the combat is very limited, but as I've progressed and I've moved the story, I've unlocked different abilities, different combos, and you know, of course, then you eventually get the addition of your pet Torgal, your big old wolf buddy who's going to come in and help out. There are elements that get added into it to the point where it's like there's tons of different buttons and combos that you can press all at different times. And then you can change them and customize them the way that you want. So yes, the combat to start is kind of repetitive because there's really only a few things that you can do. And I think that's kind of what's fun about it too, is that I'm starting to figure out how I need to plan these attacks and plan my next combo, especially comboing in with, Torgal, or, switching back and forth between different icon essences. It's a lot more in depth than it initially appears. And I'm certain that it's eventually going to get even bigger and more intense as I progress through the game. Now, when it comes to these challenges of the story being a little bit slower paced to start, and there's not enough action moving forward, I personally had to change my expectations of an RPG, a role-playing game. If I'm going to be playing a role-playing game, I need it to build the world around me. I need it to start out slow and then pick up pace, just like what you would see with an MMO, honestly, in this regard. I think a lot of players run into that issue is because they are so used to that almost instant gratification of combat and, story payoff. I need it fast. It needs to really catch me quick and do all that. And there are games that do that very well, and I'm not saying that they're not, and there's nothing wrong with those types of games. However, going into a Final Fantasy game, I've had to realize that I have to change my expectations. Wouldn't say lower them, but change how I am approaching them. And honestly, the game's story is pretty good, and the combat is unmatched. Let me break it down. What initially caught my eye of Final Fantasy 16 and what pulled me in and what really keeps me really interested into the game is the combat. As I've mentioned, the combat is very fast, it's flashy, it's a lot of quick movements and almost quick time events that happen, and it's really a lot of fun to me. That was something that I was excited for. It has met and exceeded my expectations as I have played. It has been just 100% worth it. Now, there are, as I mentioned, times that I have no idea what I'm pressing. I'm pressing all the buttons. Something's glowing, I'm pressing it, bam, bam, bam. Do all the damage. That's something that I've had to kind of scale back and be oh, okay, let's attack this strategically. Let's be a little bit smarter here. However, the combat, in my mind, is the game's best feature. It has not only been beautiful to look at, but the different combos that are brought in, the huge particle effects that are happening as you're slashing through as Clive, it's just really a lot of fun. And kind of paired with that, the other major draw that I've had for this game, and one of the reasons that I actually wanted to play it, is the huge icon fights. So icon spelled E-I-K-O-N, talking about basically the primals, where essentially it's two massive kaiju creatures, huge, large elemental creatures that are clashing together, and it's a brawl to the death. Now, is that combat really that super fast and interesting and stuff like that? Not really, but it is such a great experience to be there watching as the fists are flying, fireballs are shooting out. It's really just an engaging experience. And it kind of does feel, honestly, a lot of it is cinematic. You do participate in some regards, but honestly, again, grab that bag of popcorn because Godzilla vs. Kong just dropped its latest release. That's what these fights feel like, and it's so much fun. It is so much fun to just have that powerment feeling. Okay, we powered up, we're ready to go. And in the experience of fighting the different bosses and icons that I've run into, it's just a damn good time. So good. Now, the story thus far has been intriguing, I will say. Even from my limited experience, I feel like there are some times where I'm able to just see what's happening and call the next, we'll say, moment. What's going to happen next, I'm able to read fairly accurately because of how the story is presented. Now, I won't say that doesn't make the story bad. It doesn't mean that there aren't memorable characters already. But my thought is that there are characters that I am being drawn into that I actually enjoy. There's characters that I don't like. And then, of course, there's the whole overarching story of what's going on. We just had a huge major reveal within the first couple of hours of the story. And to keep this video spoiler free, the main character, Clive, is going through some major existential crisis stuff right here and now. And I feel like that's a lot of fun to watch as it develops. It has taken quite a while to get where we are as far as the story elements. There's lots of cutscenes and they're all very important. However, getting to where we are right now, I think the story is picking up with its pace. There's more intrigue. There's a lot more interesting dialogue that's happening. So It did take a little bit to start out, and kind of is a little predictable. I mean, it's predictable with some regards, but it's getting to the point where it's actually very, very good. And the last major strength that I will talk about is just the beauty of this game, the cinematography of this game. And I say it's cinematography because it is. It's basically a movie. This game is, many times, is a movie. You just sit back and watch. You're just watching this really awesome cutscene of, you know, a whole bunch of things happening and fire and flames and all this stuff. It's a lot of fun to be a part of and watch, but man, it looks really, really good. And I don't even have a top of the line, we'll say, graphics card. So it's not like peak performance. I'm not getting the maximum, you know, display and everything. And I haven't even tried to mess with it, but overall on PC, it's really, really good. Like this game is very much, in my mind, built for the PC because it can handle those higher graphic loads. And the way that it is put together is not in the same way as like, oh, okay, you can, you know, only pay attention to this. There's so many beautiful scenes. You could almost stop the game at any point and it would be an amazing like screenshot that would be like, wow, that's a really cool picture. The game does that. But still, that isn't the most impactful moment that I've had in this game. Best first impression of Final Fantasy 16 actually happened after we fought the first major boss. Spoiler alert ahead. The climactic battle against Clive and Benedicta, as well as Clive and then, of course, Garuda, and then the third one, which is Garuda versus Ifrit. I mean, seeing that transition, that progress, not only provided a hell of a challenge, it was just such a good experience being drawn into why we are fighting this person, why are we fighting this woman, and then understanding and actually having a bit of sympathy for her history and who she was and the choices that she made to lead to this point. It came together all in such a beautiful moment. Like, she turned into Garuda because she was really at her wit's end. Like, every choice that she has made has led her to this failure, and she just couldn't deal with it. So the primal, the icon, took over, and that was just like one of those moments where I was like, ooh, that's really, really good. And not to mention the damn fight itself. The first interaction with Benedicta, okay, that's fine. When she goes full winged harpy and is starting to beat the hell out of us, that took me like several times to actually get through the fight because it was really challenging. You had to time your dodges perfectly. You had to pay attention to the different animations that are happening. There was a lot of really good stuff that was there. And then, of course, the icon fight of Ifrit and Garuda, that was that kaiju moment. That was just like, I was freaking out. I thought it was the coolest thing. And not to mention that this fight against Clive and Garuda was basically Clive losing all control of who he was. And it was done in such a manner that he's just trying to escape the demons of his past, but the demon is inside of him. So it was him who killed his brother. And it's like, everything pulls together in such a great manner. It is such a great outward expression of anger and anguish. It was so well done. So that right there absolutely sold me on the game. That was the moment that I was like, And to capitalize on this, immediately after, Clive finds out that he is in fact Ifrit. He's the demon that ended up killing his brother. So he's having this huge existential crisis right then and there. And it's just such a good roll of emotion and moments within very, very short period of time. Absolutely. 10 for 10. That was the moment that sold me on this game. All right, Square Enix, you got me. All right, I'll play it. I'll finish through. So does Final Fantasy 16 live up to the hype? Yes, I think it does. Despite the game's pacing concerns and even a little bit of repetitiveness with the initial startup of the game, I find that it is immediately washed away with only a few hours of playtime to have this really great experience that makes me want to just keep logging back in and playing some more. Like, it's a lot of fun. And honestly, the game does deliver on what I had imagined the game should be. Even though I only had a little bit of experience, I did get to try out the demo before I bought the game, which is something I would recommend if you're even remotely interested. Try out the demo. Definitely try out the demo. If this is a game that you're going to be interested in, you'll find it out right there and you don't have to pay any money for it. And to be honest, this is only really my initial foray into the game. At the time of recording, I have only put in about 7 hours into the game. and it has been an absolute slugfest of a good time. And I know that the game is going to progress even more. The story's going to get more epic. The combat's going to get faster. There's going to be different interactions all the way back and forth. It's something that I'm actively looking forward to, and it's something that I've been thinking about often. So yes, I do believe that this game lives up to the hype. It is absolutely worth the $50, every cent that you pay for it. Now, I am still playing through the Final Fantasy 16 game, but I've also been recording my footage and making videos on that on my second channel. So you can see my entire playthrough, my real-time reactions to these things as they are happening. You can find that link here. Aside from that, stay caffeinated, folks.